most people live in quadrant one. They live in what's called what I would call, in most cases, the tyranny of the urgent. Quadrant one is often called important and urgent. Here's the problem. So many entrepreneurs and executives live so much of their lives in quadrant one that over a period of time, they have lost the ability and the perspective to differentiate between what is important and non-important, and what is urgent and what is not urgent. Some of that is because leading is a slippery slope. To lead is to empower. To lead is to support. It is not to solve problems for others. It is not to let others' monkeys get on your shoulders. This podcast today I have entitled Getting the Right Things Done. It's a short coaching podcast, and it is designed specifically for entrepreneurs, business owners, corporate leaders, really essentially anyone who can, or you believe you can, be more intentional about the directing of how you steward your time and your goals. So, as an introduction, let's talk about some things that kind of line up with getting the right things done. First of all, I want to ask and answer the question, at least from my perspective, what is vision? What is a vision? From a theoretical place and maybe even a theological place, a vision to me has two parts to it. One, it is what I would call the first creation. You are seeing something in your future that has not yet materialized, but you see it in your mind's eye. That is what I would call the first creation. And if you believe in creation from a Christian worldview, God saw what he wanted in his mind's eye, so to speak, and then he made it a reality. In fact, there's a term for that, ex nihilo, in Latin, meaning that God made something out of nothing. And so from that, we humans who are image bearers are made in the likeness of God. We have the ability to do similar things, meaning we can think something and then we can actually, in many cases, create what we are seeing in our mind's eye. And to be a little bit more specific, the word goal, some people like the word goal, some people hate the word goal. But I see vision as the goal, the big goal. So when I ask somebody what is their vision for something, I'm thinking of what is their one big goal, what is their chief aim. It could be for their life, it could be for a season of their life, a month, a quarter, a year, a decade. But it's a healthy question to ask. Sometimes people answer the question in a qualitative way. I want to be this kind of person. I want to create this kind of culture. And then some people answer it in a more concrete manner. There's numbers attached to it. There's dollars attached to it. There's something physical attached to it. Or it's sometimes a hybrid of both. But I think in order to talk about getting the right things done, we're going to eventually get into the details of how to direct your calendar, how to direct your time and your priorities. But before we do that, I think this prerequisite is to talk about these terms, vision. So if a vision is the big goal, then what are goals? Well, one thing that I've noticed in my life, in fact, the question that is often asked is, Jim, how do you get so many things done? And I don't want to be embarrassed by that compliment/question. I think that I recognize that I'm a human. I'm finite. I make mistakes. I'm certainly not perfect. but I'm growing, but I do get a lot of things done. And I think in many cases, the most important things done. And there is a process that I have learned in the 60 plus years that I've been alive and trying to sharpen these skills. So when I think of the term goals, in order for a goal to be legitimate, it has to be connected to the vision. And so I think that I also agree with a lot of the work that Pat Lencioni has put in, and in his research, says flatly that organizations and individuals who have one goal are highly likely to accomplish that goal, and people who have two goals are likely. But once you get beyond two goals, the likelihood of achieving all of those goals falls dramatically. So in my vernacular, once again, I see the vision as the goal, and then I see goals then no longer as goals in the way that we normally think about them. I think about goals now as the best way to break down how to get the vision accomplished. And so with that in mind, I usually work on 2 or 3, at the most 5 goals. Some people would call them objectives or action items. Whatever you want to call them, I see them as chunks of or sections or lanes or categories of how to accomplish that vision that I have laid out. And then those 1, 2, 3, 5 goals that I have listed on my playbook, I break those down into smaller steps. Sometimes they're reoccurring steps, and sometimes they're more like milestones. Step 1, step 2, step 3, etc., under each goal. So I'm constantly reducing the chief aim, the vision, the big idea, the guiding star into a smaller subset of a very carefully selected number of goals, and then I break each of those down into goal steps. 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps. But the key is that they're smaller, and in no way are they redundant from another category. And then I break those goal steps into a different idea of habits. In other words, I think, all right, in order to accomplish these goal steps and these goals, and therefore this chief aim or vision, then there must be some daily habits that I must be willing to commit to, and also weekly habits that are going to be different than the daily habits, and perhaps monthly, and perhaps quarterly, and perhaps semi-annual and annually. Those are the categories. Don't have to use them all, but I think about those things and I write them down. And again, they are not redundant to the goal step. They're simply a smaller goal, a smaller activity. They are what I would call a lead measure. There's something that I believe that if I do this, it will lead to success. It will lead to the accomplishment of the goals. Then I want to talk about another category, which are values. I think that people can go through the process that I just discussed, and then in the middle or towards the end of their work in accomplishing this thing, they can be disillusioned, and they have found themselves in a place that they don't want to be. They have found themselves to be the kind of person they don't want to be, and that's because they did not corral this vision and these goals and these habits within the boundaries of values. And so values is a whole nother discussion that I don't have time in this coaching session to go through. But in my mind, I kind of see values as the guardrails on either side of a road in which you are driving that keeps you from driving off the cliff or into a tree. And so they are how you test whether this vision is something that you're willing to live with and be excited about and be dedicated to, as well as the goal steps and the habits. All right. With that said, then I want to talk to you about your calendar. And it's interesting to think about the evolution of how we have learned to manage our time. And I don't want to go into all of that, but just in a quick way, I remember as a kid, when I tried to get stuff done, I would just do it intuitively. I'd keep it all in my head. And then hopefully I remembered what I needed to do. But the problem with that idea is as we get older, we can't always remember everything because our responsibilities increase and maybe our memory isn't as good. But there's also something else in human nature that we tend to do the things that we like to do. We tend to do the things that are easy to do. The things that are hard to do or the things that we don't like to do, we tend to put off. And that's another reason why we don't get the right things done. We don't get the right things done for a lot of reasons, but one of them is we simply have too many goals. We think we have to accomplish everything. Another one is that we don't do the hard things that we need to do and the things that need to be done in order to accomplish what it is that we want to accomplish. So I'm entering now into more, still strategic, but now more into tools, a toolbox, and learning how to steward. So we're going to be entering the idea of calendar and a list of tasks to complete. Now, some people are directed by their calendars. In other words, other people control what goes on their calendar, or a lack of discipline and a lack of direction controls what goes on one's calendar. And so at the end of a week and a month and a quarter, you look back and you begin to notice that you really didn't have a whole lot of say into where your life went during that day, that week, that quarter, that year. It just kind of happened because happenstance directed your calendar. A boss directed your calendar. A loved one directed your calendar. Other people, maybe you're a people pleaser and just wanting to be liked, directs your calendar. In other words, maybe all the wrong things direct your calendar instead of your purpose, instead of your mission, instead of your values, instead of your well thought out vision and goals. Which, from a Christian perspective, I like to think that my playbook, my plans has been a co-creation with the faith that I have in my Creator. Where did He put me? Why did He put me there? How did He make me? What gifts did He give me? And I engage God in that kind of a faith way, thinking through all these things that I want to accomplish. So simply put, some people are directed by their calendars and others direct their calendars in the direction of their vision. I hope that you'll be somebody who will start rethinking, are you stewarding your calendar in a way that matches your God-given vision and values? All right, so now let's start talking about calendar skills, ways in which we can steward our time to direct. So I talked about those habits. And for me, and I'm going to be referring to myself, not so that you do what I do, but more to give you an example of what I do. And maybe you will find alignment either in exactness or different, but you'll catch on to the principles. So as I walk through that whole process of vision, goals, goal steps, habits, values, I come out to realize that I need to have habits in my life and I need to block time for those habits. I can't just simply believe that they're going to happen. So for example, for me, I've got some very specific habits on my calendar. I have reading. I have reading on my calendar at least 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Well, technically, I have it Monday, Tuesday through Friday, and Saturday. That's just a specific issue required in my context. I have writing. I write minimum 5 days a week. I make my time. Now you might think, well, how do you make time for that? Well, for what I've noticed about me and my habits, it's just like exercising. Exercising is another one, and weekly evaluation is another one. Those are some examples of my habits, and they get blocked on my calendar. But for example, for me, exercising, the biggest challenge for me is walking out the door. So if I walk out the door and then, to exercise, then I will exercise and I will finish it. But exercising is on my daily habit. My minimum goal is 4 times a week that I will exercise. Now, sometimes I exercise 5 and 6 times a week, but the minimum goal is 4. So I actually block time for that. I do that ahead of time. I block next week when exactly I'm going to exercise, especially if there are some conflicts in my calendar. I've got to move those blocks around. So reading, writing, exercising is on my calendar and blocked on my calendar, as well as a weekly, evaluation, monthly financial review, et cetera, et cetera. I can give you those kinds of examples. So before I do anything, I make sure that those important things, those important habits are on my calendar. Now, in my case, reading and writing are on my calendar, not just because those are good and noble things to do, but they're specifically tied to a vision that I have. In this case, for the year 2023, my vision is to finish my next book. And to do that, I have to write every day. And just like exercising, if I open up my laptop and if I start writing, I'll get some writing done. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, but sometimes it flows and sometimes it doesn't. But I got to do it. And that's on there. So sometimes I write only a paragraph in one day. Sometimes I'll write 5 pages. It'll just come. And then frankly, when I have a block of time that I have put down for writing, I might end up writing 20, 30 pages in a day. It just kind of depends. Now, similar to this, I block quadrant 2 time. If you're not familiar with that terminology, Stephen Covey, I don't recall exactly when he published the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but I know that as a young man in my 20s, in the 80s, I read that book, and I have tried to live by a lot of his habits that he explains since then. And one of those is this idea of quadrant 2, which stands for very important but non-urgent issues. So I put on my calendar, I block time on my calendar every week. I block time for very important but non-urgent time. I block it and I treat it like an appointment, just as important as going to my mom's birthday party or going to my child's graduation. It's at that level of importance. So I don't just stick it on my calendar in a sloppy way, hoping that it will happen. No, I have all the intentionality of making sure that I follow through. Well, what are some examples of quadrant 2? Well, some of them are examples like the habits that I've already talked about, rest, exercise, key relationships, think time for problem solving, evaluating, creating, projects, those kinds of things that are super important, but they don't often get done by most people because most people live in quadrant 1. They live in what's called what I would call, in most cases, the tyranny of the urgent. Quadrant 1 is often called important and urgent. Here's the problem. So many entrepreneurs and executives live so much of their lives in quadrant 1 that over a period of time, they have lost the ability and the perspective to differentiate between what is important and non-important, and what is urgent and what is not urgent. Some of that is because leading is a slippery slope. To lead is to empower. To lead is to support. It is not to solve problems for others. It is not to let others' monkeys get on your shoulders. If you haven't read that Harvard Review article about, I think it's entitled, Who's Got the Monkey, I would encourage you to do that. If you're a leader and you just notice that you keep putting out fires constantly, and because that is a term that I hear a lot by leaders, I'm putting out another fire. I mean, I use that terminology too. But when we find ourselves saying that a lot, it's usually a symptom that we're getting involved in someone else's business that really they are paid to take care of those things. And so then what happens is over a period of time, we get worse. We don't get better, we get worse because we don't spend enough time into quadrant 2 activities. And I hope you're not hearing my tone as judgmental and negative. I think you get it, right? If this is starting to convict you, if you're already arguing with me, and then actually we're aligning because we know how difficult this is, right? Everybody wants to tell us what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. and yet we're the ones that are responsible to produce the things that are most important. All right, so quadrant 2. So 2 things got to go on that calendar first and foremost. Number 1 is those habits, and yes, habits are quadrant 2 activities. I'll get to color coding here in just one second. I'll be transitioning in just a moment to color coding and how that helps. But quadrant 2 then is the second thing that goes on the calendar that are like habits, but they're blocks. So they're usually larger blocks, bigger time. So like if you block an hour for exercise, if you block 45 minutes for exercise, or even 30 minutes for exercise, if you block 30 minutes for reading, if you block an hour for reading, if you block, and the point is if your morning routine looks like mine, it's a 2-hour block of exercising, for me, reading scripture and other materials, writing in my journal, and working on my book. And all of that is about a minimum of 2 hours. Now, when I'm planning ahead, I see that I have openings sometimes, and I will steal those openings. I will not allow someone else to come in and stick time. So I'll take the 2 hours and I'll make it 3. And it just gives me more time to do more of that same thing. Then the second thing goes on the calendar is the bigger blocks. To me, the bigger blocks is at least 2 hours. It's sometimes 3, sometimes a half of a day, and sometimes a full day, and it'll be labeled quadrant 2. Now, what you would notice if you were to look at my calendar, you would notice that my habits and my quadrant 2 activities all have the same color. They're color-coded in green. When I think about green, I think about living. I think about spring. I think about growing. And so so color coding is really important, in my opinion. If you have a calendar that has the ability to be manipulated by colors, then I would certainly use those. If you don't, you might think about changing, because it is a very helpful feature that will help you in your evaluation. Let me give you another example of color coding, because all I've given you is green. Now, we all know that there is quadrant 1. There are really important and urgent meetings that we have to go to that have been called, said, hey, on Tuesday, can we meet about this? Or there is a problem that you are trying to work on, and it's got to be dealt with. You can't call it green. It really is a fire drill, but it's something that you're going to work on for the next 3 weeks, on every Monday at 2:00 or whatever. Or it's in retrospect, something happened and it literally was an urgent thing. I color code those red, right? And it's important for me to look, because if I look back at my calendar and I see a lot of red, something's wrong. Something is wrong, and I need to pay attention to that. I also have other appointments that are important, but they're not quadrant 2 appointments, and I might label different customers or clients with certain colors differently. For example, I am promoting one of my clients right now by the hat that I'm wearing, and that particular client has a color, and my major clients have a color, and I color code those appointments or activities that I'm doing with those colors. You might decide to color code your family stuff the same as green, or maybe you have a color that represents your family, and you'll put that in there. Anything that can help you quickly differentiate from one activity to another through colors, that will save you time and it will speak to you quickly. Okay. For some of you, you are eating this up. For others, you are about ready to click stop because it sounds boring. So whatever will be, will be. The next thing that I would say you want to look at your calendar is white space. And what I mean by white space is it's not taken up by any appointment. And you got to have white space. You should see white space between all of your appointments. I see a lot of my clients make the mistake of they have a 1 to 2 o'clock, and then they have a 2 to 3 o'clock. Yeah, you just can't sustain that. If you have a 1 to 2, and then that next appointment should be 3:15 or even 3:30, you should have margin built in to breathe, to take a walk, to get up and to take a walk, maybe to go to the gym, maybe to actually have a lunch hour where you go with somebody that's a friend. There is no agenda. You don't always have to make every lunch a business lunch. Those of you that work, you're like me, you're type A, you want to make everything efficient, and so you're not going to go to lunch unless you can also make it a business lunch. I get it, but make some of those lunches just fun, an old friend. Or if you're an introvert, you're thinking about having that nice healthy salad by yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that too. So I want to look at your calendar. I want to make sure there's enough margin so that your blood pressure isn't constantly rising, that you're not living on adrenaline, because when you live on adrenaline, only bad things can result. And when I think about margins, I simply think about recovery time. Now, there's another topic. I mentioned introvert. If you are an introvert, even a little bit of one, then be aware of your calendar. If you know that you're going to an event or you're doing a certain thing that is going to drain you because of the relational pool on that, the energy that it pulls from you, you might have really great people skills. A lot of introverts I know have amazing people skills, but in the process, you do get drained because introverts get more energy from time alone and think time. So when they are around people for a long period of time or an intense period of time, it will tend to drain you. So when you've got something coming up like that on your calendar, make sure that on the other side of that, you have something planned that is recovery time. So it might be quadrant 2 time. It might be exercise time. So be aware of that. If you're an extrovert, a high extrovert, then the opposite might occur. You might be gaining energy as you're going along, in the day. All right, the other thing I want to talk about in getting the right things done is I think it's really important to look back every day. So if today were a Tuesday and you're wrapping up the day, before you completely wrap up the day, I would go back over your calendar and make sure that what your calendar says actually happened and make the changes to reflect what actually happened. So if an appointment didn't happen, get rid of it. If a appointment that was supposed to be 30 minutes turned out to be an hour and 15, make sure that your calendar reflects that. You need to learn about yourself and maybe the discipline or the lack of discipline that is entering into your calendar. And if it's not a discipline issue, maybe it's just a realism issue, and you're always being too optimistic about how long a particular appointment will take, or the type of appointments that will take, or work, writing an email, writing a letter. You block 15 minutes to writing a difficult email, and then you realize later that you're not giving yourself enough time. Here's the worst thing that happens when you give yourself enough time. You get done early, and now you've got some time. And often, and almost every single one of us, when we have some extra time, we know that it would be great because there's some other stuff that just didn't get done on time and within that time that we had hoped. And so, you learn and you look forward, and that's what you do. Now, your calendar, in my opinion, is your living expression of your playbook. And your playbook is your architecture. The playbook is the architecture. It's the work that you do. Your playbook is working on your life. It's working on your business. That's what a playbook is. And of course, at Lead Today, which of course sponsors the Today Count show, is more than happy to help you think through and create a playbook, and therefore make sure that your calendar is a living expression of that playbook. I hope this was somewhat helpful to you today.